Okay, so I have been back in the US since the middle of December, and it's the middle of January now, and the whole time I've been here, it hasn't snowed. I didn't get a white Christmas. But a week before I head back to Brazil, we get some snow. So, I'd be remiss if I didn't come out here and enjoy the snow for all those people who don't get snow, especially my friends in Brazil. None of them get any snow. So let me, whoa, this was not a good idea. Oh, it's cold. Snow. Welcome to the northern part of the US. Okay, it's enough of that cold. Let's turn on studio mode. Alright, so I've been here in the US the last few weeks, but I have still been learning Portuguese, and I'm still coming across all those fun and crazy things that make the language interesting and exciting to me. So let's go over those today. So the title of this video is Última Bolacha Do Pacote, and this is an expression in Portuguese which literally translates to the last cookie in the bag, but it also refers to someone who's super awesome or super cool, or extremely attractive. It's one thing to speak Brazilian Portuguese, it's another thing to try to sound like a Brazilian speaking Portuguese. Let's take a look at this sentence. Tipo, é o carro dele. Ele vai me dar ele, porque, tipo, somos amigos. Tipo, você vai como a gente. So if we break down this sentence, this first expression, é o carro dele, this is Brazilian Portuguese, because grammatically in Portuguese it should be o seu carro, his car. So Brazilians would say, ele vai me dar ele, but grammatically this should be ele vai me dar o. They would use this o, which is the pronoun for it, but no Brazilian will say that. Como a gente. So this literally translates to with the people, but this is how they say us. A gente is us. So grammatically it should be conosco, which I talked about in another video, but you will never hear anybody say that. They'll say como a gente. And if you notice, I threw in 3 or 4 cheapo, and this is a filler word like and you hear this a lot. So make sure you throw that into your conversations here and there. Just sprinkle it in. Makes you sound more authentic. And if you were to write a message like this, you need to make sure you throw in a KKKK, which is the way they would say ha ha ha, laughing. And if you're speaking to a North American who speaks Portuguese, don't use 3 Ks because that means something different for us. You can also use things like VC for você or TMJ for estamos juntos, which means like I got you. In many languages, there's a word for thing. Stuff, an object that you don't have a name for, you don't know the name. And this exists in Portuguese as well. They use the word coisa, or in other parts they use the word negocio, which actually translates to business. So hand me that business over there. They also can do this with verbs. So if you can't think of the verb for something, you can just say coisar. Very useful. If you don't know the verb for something or the noun for something, you can just say, esta coisa pode coisar as coisas? Yeah, it's a perfectly legit sentence and you didn't really say anything. So the Brazilians do tallies in a very interesting way. And I lived in China and I learned how they did their tally system. It's written out in a character, just happened to have 5 strokes. Yeah, so it works out. And then in the US, we do the 4 straight lines and then 1 diagonally. And in Brazil, they do a square with a diagonal through it, which is also 5 tallies. And that's how they do it. And I find it funny that if you want to talk about boots in general, you can just say uma bota, which means 1 boot. So if somebody's going to the store, they can say, I'm going to buy a boot. And this means I'm going to buy boots, but they refer to it in the singular for some reason. Hand me that boot could be hand me those boots in the translation, but literally it's going to be hand me a boot. And they can also say boots, botas, it just depends on who you're talking to, but 1 boot could be 2. And I don't know if this works for other pairs or other nouns that are generally together, but so far boot's the only one that I've discovered. And when you talk to a teacher and you ask them why this, why that, and sometimes teachers come up with explanations that aren't technically true, but it just sounds good. And I remember I had a teacher told me, oh, we don't use this word because it sounds too close to this word. You can't change it. They can't be too close. And then you come across words like aprender and aprender, which when you're speaking normal speed is the same word. They're super close and they have completely different meanings. Be careful of the explanations your teachers give you. Now that I'm thinking about it, when I taught in China, I'm sure I made up some stuff. Sorry, Chinese students. Another thing I really enjoy doing is comparing Portuguese to the other languages I know. And let's start first with the way that all these languages are different. So the word raccoon in Spanish is mapache, in French is raton laveur, in Italian is processione, and in Portuguese is guaxinim. Lane, like on a highway, in Spanish is carril, in French it's voie, in Italian it's sentiero, and in Portuguese it's faixa. So now let's look at how all the other languages are the same, but Portuguese is different. So there's a hot new show on Netflix called Wednesday, and it's based on Wednesday Addams from the Addams Family. And in Spanish, it's miércoles, which is Wednesday. In French, mercredi. In Italian, mercolodi. And then in Portuguese, Wandinha, because they numbered their days, and it'd be really weird to call a TV show quarta-feira. Rosemary in Spanish is romero. In French, romaran. And in Portuguese, alecrim. Bus station in Spanish is estación de bus. In French, station de bus. In Italian, stazione degli autobus. And even in Chinese, gongchijan. Gongchi's bus, and Jan is station. But then you get to Portuguese, rodoviária. So when you want to tell somebody you understand something, you'd say, I understand. Present tense. In Spanish, entiendo. In French, je comprends. In Italian, capisco. And in Portuguese, it's entendi, because nobody says entendo. And it's the same thing in Chinese. They don't say, I understand now. They say, wo zhi dao le. I understood. So I guess they're saying the action's over. I already understand. But yeah, Portuguese and Chinese are the only ones that are different in that case. So let's look at some fun literal translations. And we're going to specifically look at the word pé first. And pé literally means foot. Pé de cabra literally is goat foot. And this is how they say crowbar. Pé de alface literally means foot of lettuce. But in English, we say head of lettuce. Pé de and then any fruit. For example, pé de manga is fruit tree. So foot of the fruit is the tree. Pé de meia, which literally translates to foot of sock or foot of half, because like I did another video, meia has a bunch of different meanings, but it actually is a rainy day fund. And so now let's look at the word chá, which literally translates to tea. Chá de fralda, it literally means diaper tea, and this is a baby shower. Chá de casa nova is new tea house. And it literally translates to housewarming. Chá revelação would translate to revelation tea, and this is what they use for a gender reveal party. Now let's take a look at some Portuguese that I just find interesting. The word colher as a noun is a spoon, but the verb colher is to pick. So if you colher with a colher, you're picking something with a spoon. So the pronunciation of these two words, male, pronunciation is exactly the same, but the spelling is different. This one means mine, and this one is either a person's name or honey. Avô and avô. Okay, now I feel like I'm speaking Chinese where I'm trying to like change the tone just to distinguish between two words. One is grandfather, one's grandmother. But now when I'm seeing all these accents on stuff, I'm starting to think Chinese again. So instead of just saying avô and avô, I'm saying avô and avô. Old habits die hard. If there's bastante something, there's a lot of it, muito. But if there's o bastante, then there's enough of it, suficiente. So the word knockoutchi, this is a funny word because knockoutchi sounds like knockout and means knockout. Normally when the Brazilians take an English word, an Anglicism, they'll still spell it the normal way and then pronounce it the way they want. In this case, they're like, no, we're going to change the spelling as well, which makes more sense for me as a non-native speaker, because now it's a new word that now means this other word to me, instead of seeing my word and then hearing it pronounced differently, which can be confusing. The raiva is funny because it's the word for rabies, but raiva as an adjective is angry. So I guess something with rabies would be angry, but it's just really weird to be like, oh, that guy is rabies, which means he's angry. So rancho is a ranch. And in the south of Brazil, if you fazer o rancho, you're not making a ranch or doing a ranch, you're actually buying groceries. Another thing I learned while traveling in the south of Brazil is the adverb tree, which they use for very or muito. So you can say Tri boa, like very good, instead of saying muito boa. And if you put the word ne at the end of any sentence, it becomes like right in English, or you know. It's a way to ask a rhetorical question. So blah, 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 ne. It's a beautiful day, ne. So if you want to sound like you're from the South, use fazer o rancho, tri, and ne, and you'll fit right in. And one of the funniest parts of these videos that I do are the false friends. So in Spanish, if somebody says mis disculpas, you're thinking my apologies, like I'm sorry. But in Brazilian Portuguese, if you say minhas desculpas, those are my excuses. Tirar in Spanish is to throw, but in Portuguese, it's to take. If you want to say throw in Portuguese, it's jogar. Pegar in Spanish is to stick, but in Portuguese, it's to take. If you want to say stick in Portuguese, it's colar. Bote in Spanish is a pool of money, and in Portuguese, it's a boat. If you want to say pool of money in Portuguese, it's vaquinha, which means little cow. Another video. Niño in Spanish is boy. Niño in Portuguese is nest. If you want to say boy, it's menino. So in Spanish, when you have just done something, you would say acabo de. And in Portuguese, you would say acabei de, which is the past tense. But you can also say acabo de, but only when you want to add strong emphasis. Hacer falta, and that is to be missed by somebody. But fazer falta in Portuguese is to need something. So be careful with your literal translations. Polvo in Spanish is dust, or something you throw. I made that joke in another video. Come on, Tim, get some better jokes. But polvo in Portuguese is octopus. If you want to say dust, it's po. Acercar in Spanish is to get close to something. Acercar in Portuguese is to surround. If you want to say to get close to something, you say aproximar. Abrigo in Spanish is a coat or big jacket. Abrigo in Portuguese means I house, like I give you housing, or I house you, I house something, I give it a place to stay. If you want to say coat in Portuguese, it's casaco. Okay, let's look at English now. Pretender is not to pretend, it's to demand something. If you want to say pretend, you say fingir. Canta como un canario is not to sing like a canary, like to give somebody up. It's actually just means that you sing, you have a beautiful voice, you sing well. So if you want to say dime someone out or give someone up, you say shis novi. And somebody explained what it meant to me, but I forgot. So if you know, leave a comment below. Tell us where shis novi comes from. Prejudicar does not mean to prejudge, it means to damage. If you want to prejudge, you would say prejulgar. Inédito does not mean unedited, it means unheard of or unprecedented. If you want to say unedited, you say non editado. Bones are not bones, they're actually baseball hats. If you want to say bones, you say osos. So the verb excluir in Portuguese can mean to exclude, but it also means to delete. So if you're on your mobile phone and you try to delete a photo, it's probably going to pop up and say excluir. So it doesn't mean you're going to exclude it to a new folder. It means you're going to delete it. So be careful with that one. And other words you might see that mean delete are apagar, tirar, and remover. So there's a lot of deleting happening in Portuguese. Okay, so I'm still learning Portuguese. I'm going to be moving back to Brazil very soon here. So I'm going to learn more and I'm going to keep making videos like this. If you enjoy this type of content, please give me a like. And make sure you leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. All right, so come back here. That's enough of that. Just really curious to see if the mic is working well. Thanks, Dad, for filming for me. All right, and cut.